In the blistering heat of the Negev, Israeli farmers have created an agricultural miracle. Pioneering the use of drip irrigation, they have doubled their harvests with the same amount of water. Perforated tubes deliver water directly to the roots of the plants, avoiding evaporation losses. Moisture sensors tell farmers precisely when their crops need water. Drip technology can save a third of the water used in spray methods. However, with any form of irrigation, a problem may develop.
History tells us that irrigation has periods like in the life of a married couple. There is the honeymoon between the irrigator and the land, and this happens in the beginning like most honeymoons, and after some decades there is a increasing deterioration of the land as a result of irrigation.
Salt brought in by irrigation water concentrates in the soil, damaging its fertility.
Historical example is the Fertile Crescent, Iraq of these days, where thousands of years ago irrigation was used, but the land deteriorated and some of it has still not recovered from this bad experience with human irrigation. Similar processes are now starting to be seen in every irrigated region all over the world, from California through the Mediterranean region to Australia, China, India, and South America.
Once salts build up, they must be flushed out with even more water. So over the course of generations, there are limits to how much water can be conserved. The power to remove salt from ocean water has long been a dream, promising almost limitless water for human needs. Desalinated water is already serving some urban populations, those that can afford its high price. But it's unlikely in the foreseeable future to be cheap enough for use in agriculture.
The problem with desalination is that it's very energy intensive. It takes a lot of energy to remove salt from water. So at the moment, most of the desalination that's happening in the world is in the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, they account for about half of all the desalination that's happening, even though they have only a tiny share of the world's population. They're essentially turning oil into water, and they're among the few countries that can afford to do that.
Disputes over water in the Mideast go back a long way. According to the Bible, the wells in the land of the Philistines were called hatred and contention. In Gaza and on the west bank of the Jordan River, Israel provides piped-in water to Israeli settlers, while Palestinian citizens have received a more limited supply.
When it comes to military occupation and fairness, they don't go together. If the current situation continues, I see the Palestinians heading for a water catastrophe. Already we see signs of it in Gaza, where kidney failures as a result of drinking brackish water and unsafe and polluted water. This cannot continue. This is a recipe for disaster.
In most Palestinian homes, rainwater is collected and stored in cisterns below ground. Each cistern costs $10,000, an expensive investment for families who only earn half that in a year.
A settler in the West Bank consumes 7 times more water than a Palestinian in the West Bank. And in Gaza, they consume 14 times more. This is a source of injustice, which is causing many Palestinians to ask, why? We need to have water. Our children drink water exactly like Israeli children.
Of all of the people in the Middle East, the Palestinians are those most short of water. And I, as an Israeli, would like to say that without getting into the amounts of water that are under discussion, it should be in Israel's interest to see to it that the Palestinians get a fair deal and get enough water so they feel comfortable for the future. It's in Israel's interest to live in peace with its neighbors.
I think the potential for conflict is going to persist until we see water sharing agreements that divide the water equitably in each of the major river basins in the Middle East and elsewhere. We're beginning to see countries realize that they have benefits to gain from cooperating, and if they continue to see that, we could see water and water scarcity become a motivation for peace rather than war.
Half a world away, the tug of war over water goes on in the arid American West. There's a lust for water here that borders on obsession. When people get free time, they head for the nearest water they can find. Rivers, pools, artificial lakes. There are no natural lakes here. Water from the Colorado River has transformed a desert into the fastest growing region of the country. 10 major dams stop up the river, and canals siphon off water for irrigation and growing cities. Most of these water projects were constructed before the 1960s and 70s, when things began to change.
These projects before were built with almost no environmental consideration at all. And then finally the Endangered Species Act, the National Environmental Policy Act came along, and those allowed the public into the process. And then the costs began to get outlandish. The best sites had been taken. And so the newer dams were much more expensive for the equivalent amount of water that you might get out of them. And essentially, as the country amassed a greater and greater federal deficit, people began to say, wait a minute, why are we building billion-dollar dams when all you have to do is conserve some water and you can get just as much with conservation as you would with supply?